Welcome to the Ecom Profit Podcast. I'm your host, Dawn Sinkula, and today we have MaryBeth Maskovas. Is that close? Is that close?
It was pretty
We
close, yeah.
pretty close. We both have names, last names that are, very hard to pronounce. So I can appreciate the challenge that comes with this. But MaryBeth is someone who's been working in the digital analytics space for close to 10 years. And during her career, she's been specializing in ways to give business owners like insights into how to grow their business. And I think one of the things that myself as a personal business owner, as well as our clients and others listening in this space, have so many questions about data. And so MaryBeth and I are going to talk about data today. Yes, it's going to be exciting. No, it's not going to be boring. We're going to have good conversation on how you as a business owner can use data to really help drive and grow your business. But before we get into that fun stuff, MaryBeth, tell me more about who you are and how you got into this space.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think the how I got into it is always kind of an interesting story because when I graduated college, there weren't degrees yet in digital analytics, data science, things like that. Now there definitely are. So I have a degree in evolutionary biology and ecology. Um,
Wow.
and that actually had a lot of statistics in it.
Yeah.
And I learned R, the programming language for my, they use it a lot for like studies and things like that. And I kind of fell into a marketing analyst role after that
Mm.
at a company that I think had a bit of an inkling a little early that that was going to be a thing and that like data science was going to be something that was going to become important in digital businesses. So that's where I started out, was in consulting, working with there were like medium, some small startups, businesses, some big ones as well. So I got to touch a lot of things right away and get a feel for where things were at and get into tools like Google Analytics really early. And since then, I've had an international career. After that, went to Europe and I worked for a company that got acquired by Kayak, the
Mm.
travel meta search, and worked with that. They have some really advanced stuff that they do in analytics. So I got to see kind of like the most advanced and then what startups were doing. And in 2020, I came back to the US and I started my own firm, Insight Lime, where I really focused on the things that I thought were most important, which is getting those business decisions out of the data. How do you do that? How do you pragmatically focus on those things where a lot of times we focus a lot on implementing or tracking
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very interesting background, but always kind of statistic based, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
things like that, which is cool. So when people think about like data and analytics, a lot of times they think about, if you're doing Facebook ads, right? We talk a lot about those pieces of data that are there. We think about financial data. We think about, okay, my P&L and, what am I looking at here? There's other Google Analytics and trackings and things like that. So kind of the traditional things that I think of when I think of data analytics. But I think when you and I were talking initially before the interview, there's so many other things that you need to understand and know as it relates to your business. Can you kind of talk about maybe some of the false myths that people think that they know, or maybe trip ups is what I'm thinking of? Like, people always look at this piece of data, but they really should be looking at this instead. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I was just talking to a colleague about this yesterday and ranting about it a little bit. I think the number one little like area that we look at in the wrong way sometimes or over focus on is the platform specific data from like Facebook, Google Ads, et cetera. And thinking about all those digital sources of marketing is like a full pie is like a way to think about it. And this is like something that you can really fall into a trap where then you look in something like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, whatever tool you're using, and you're saying, oh, well, I have this big chunk of traffic that's like unidentified or direct traffic. There must be something wrong. And then Facebook is only this much, and the conversion rate isn't very good. And like what we forget is when we look at macro effects of marketing, there's a lot of other reasons why people are coming to your business that isn't tied to one of your paid channels or to organic. you repeat customers are really hard to put into a bucket like that.
Yeah.
There's just that general momentum that a business has and like brand recognition, et cetera, that are so difficult to quantify in this pie that we've started to believe is like the source of truth. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people fall into, and especially smaller businesses, where really trying hard to make the most out of every single penny that we spend. And
Yeah.
so we hyper focus on those paid channels because they kind of promise that you can see that a little bit more than if you did like, an ad in the newspaper or whatever is appropriate for your business. But like buyer beware, I guess is what I say, is
Yeah.
that like we focus on it so much, and and sometimes I see business owners spending a lot of like disproportionate energy on that part, and they neglect things like improving product, improving customer experience, thinking holistically about where they're showing up for their customers.
I think that's a great call out because I am guilty of it myself too, where we spend a lot of time trying to figure out reporting. We spend a lot of time creating reporting. We spend a lot of time doing reporting, both for ourselves and for, our clients. And a lot of times I feel like if we just took a step back and realized like, ooh, this one cog in the wheel is broken that has nothing to do with data, it would all go this way anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah.
let's not, get too far down the road. But what would be if you were to kind of come into a business and, as you start to work with clients initially, what are some things that you start to look at as kind of the high level, metrics that business owners should be looking at in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we've kind of hinted at some of the parts of it where our firm and myself tend to look at things a little more broadly.
Hmm.
Someone may come to us with a specific issue that they think is the main focus, and we'll walk in and start asking really broad questions like, well, what is the vision for the business in the next few years? What are some of the goals that you've already set? What are some of the pain points that your team is seeing? And then, what we start to dig into or think about is like those core pillars. I think about things like, and this doesn't sound very data focused, right? But there's really, it comes in a little later, but like customer service, like how is the product being perceived? And core metrics depend a little bit on the business and what they want to focus on, because if you're a funded startup and your goal is to grow above all else, we're going to focus on different things than if you were focused on profitability over everything. So,
Yeah.
I think I asked that core question of like what is the focus? And then if a business comes to me and says, "Well, we don't really have one," then I know the problem is there. So
Right.
like yeah, because
Like,
sometimes that does happen. They're
start
like, "Well,
there.
we want to do 500 things or whatever." So it's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, well, your issue here is that you need to focus yourself first before we know
Yeah.
what to fix."
Yeah.
So it's almost like it takes more of a like a coaching perspective or something
Yeah.
like that to
Yeah.
come in and understand the context before we really start to answer those specific questions, which are still relevant, of like, why do people not convert from Facebook, or why does this thing happen on my website?
Yeah. I think, for us too, we always have sort of the mentality of taking that holistic approach as well. And that's kind of what I think you're saying here is
Yeah.
that, you got to kind of step back and understand big picture what you're doing as a business before you can use the data to help you drive those decisions. And everybody's using specific types of data to think that they're driving the decision that they're trying to make. But in reality, that might not be the right set of tools or data sets to be looking at, or even understanding what you're measuring. I think that's a big thing. And maybe you've seen this in your experience as well. What would be probably the one thing that you think people measure the most that they shouldn't be measuring? Maybe
Hmm.
that's a trick question. I don't know. Like I'll give you an example. I see a lot of people come in and, they're looking at their Facebook ads and they're looking at return on ad spend. And that one little
Hmm.
metric is deciding their whole strategy for their business. And the reality is there's so many other parts that go into that return on ad spend, like you said at the beginning, right? Like that one little bitty metric, one, isn't correctly measured most of the time. Two, is only one indicator, right, of what's actually happening in the holistic realm of business. But business owners think that's the metric that is like the pivotal thing. If I don't get that right, then all my Facebook ads are not working, or all my media is not working, or whatever it is. So for us, we see that a lot of times. Would you say those are the types of things that you see, or are there other areas where you see businesses going way deep into things that like, no, 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 don't focus there?
Yeah, ROAS is one that a lot of times is one of the culprits, but I think you set it up for something else that I think is an issue that a lot of business owners do, is to focus on one metric where really it should
Yeah.
be a pairing.
Yeah.
And yes, I could complain about ROAS and how flawed I think it is for
Right.
a lot of
We do a whole
reasons, but
podcast on that.
yeah, we could.
Right.
We
Yeah.
definitely could, because there's a lot of issues with that, especially when it's in Facebook proper. But I think one thing that I see over and over again with really big companies even is that a specific department or the company as a whole says, all right, it's conversion rate and that's all we're focusing on. But if you think about some of those things like return on ad spend or conversion rate, if you focused on just conversion rate, you could hyper optimize that by cutting out traffic that's lower converting, by only catering to returning customers. And all of a sudden, if you didn't have, like, say, revenue paired with that, you might have a really high conversion rate, but all of a sudden your business is closing because you haven't earned enough revenue. So I
Right.
think that that's like the kicker there, is that you can't optimize to only one. You have to pair it with something that makes a balance, and that's like a really key piece of it. And then the other part would be like, yeah, focusing on one that might not be, especially if that's like a business as a whole and that's all they care
Yeah.
about, and
Yeah.
is like, okay, well, wait a minute, what kind of business are you? I
Mhm.
mean, unless you're like, I don't know, like a lead generation business that then is selling the leads. And so ROAS is like critically important to the like bottom line of your business. Like,
Yeah.
you're not that's not your business for most people. You're
Right.
selling a product or whatever. So why is that metric the most important
Right.
when your real goal is to sell a product that connects well to your customers? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's like a bunch of layers in there, but I think the pairing is one thing that is like a huge common pitfall that, like, if anyone listening to this is like, oh, we only have that ROAS as the focus. Like, think about what would happen if you optimize that into the ground, and
Right.
like what thing needs to hold it in check. Because like a lot of times, your team members are really working hard towards whatever you say is your goalpost. And
Yeah.
in the process might actually hurt the business if you're not balancing that correctly.
That's great. That's a great like observation in that there's got to be more to it. And if you were to say like here are the things that I think people should focus on the most, what do you kind of see as after all this experience? Like what are the maybe top, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 things that businesses really should look at. Let's stick with it because we could go in a lot of directions, but let's stick with like a product-based business
Mhm.
owner who is, in a medium size, whatever that means, but a medium size space that's successful and having, good returns and making money and, they're doing okay and they want to do better. Whatever that means. What would be some metrics that they should be looking at on a regular basis, or how should they pair their metrics together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it depends a little bit, right, on that focus of what they're wanting to drive towards, because they may change over time based on the
Sure.
strategy. But some of the ones that you should consider is, it's going to sound really simplistic, but like revenue, profitability, um, customer satisfaction, however you measure that. I know there's a ton of different ways to do it, like NPS, et cetera. Return rate is one that I think that can be one of those
Yeah.
health indicators as well. And then when it comes to marketing on a broader level, it depends on how big the business is. If it's a big enough business with a lot of spend, I would say incrementality, which is something that we can talk about, which is
Mm.
kind of like the holy grail, right? That you're trying to get to, which is saying like, can we measure how much business that this marketing drove that wouldn't have occurred if we hadn't run this marketing campaign, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you can't get that, whatever other indicators you can tie to as far as like profitability per channel or for your marketing is
Yeah.
actually a better one to try and focus on, even though it's not always perfect. You can't measure it, you don't know exactly the attribution. But if you're looking at that a little bit more clearly instead of just return on ad spend. But sometimes, return on ad spend can be a focus. But, really the core ones, I think, is something that we miss sometimes when
Yeah.
we're thinking about, okay, well, we get really focused on marketing, like really looking at your profitability, revenue,
Yeah.
and then any other things that may be important to the strategy that you're driving. So, like if
Right.
you're launching a new product or something like that, or you really want to take up market share, then those are the things that you would be want to be looking at.
So let's talk about that incrementality a little bit. And
Mm.
and because I think that is probably one that most business owners, at least in my 10 years doing this, I haven't heard many speak about, right? And so but I think it's really important, right? And key to understanding sort of at a higher level what your efforts are doing, right? So all of those really good, but let's talk about that one specifically. So maybe define it for us first, Mary Beth, of what that means to you, and then how I use that in my kind of day-to-day measurements.
Yeah. So like the definition is essentially what I said before of measuring how much revenue sales came from a marketing campaign or marketing as a whole that wouldn't have happened if you didn't run marketing. So there's a lot of times where when we think about marketing, it might be assisting a sale or it might be just putting a sale a little earlier. So like maybe someone has a buying cycle of twice a year and then you have a sale and you're able to get them to do that second buy a year a little earlier, then that's like not necessarily like 100% I wouldn't have gotten that sale if I hadn't run this Facebook ad, for example.
Yeah.
Um, and the tricky thing is that to do true incrementality, you have to have a lot of ad spend or a lot of maturity in being able to like design an experiment. For example, if you were going to do something like, say, a radio or a billboard campaign, you would have to run it and have control markets as well. So you'd be
Hmm.
like, okay, well, I know that Denver and this other city are really comparable. And I'm going to do it in 5 different cities. So I'm going to have 5 controls in 5 other cities. And I'm going to then measure the uplift of brand awareness. Like it can become really expensive
Yeah.
on a more simple level, like you can even think of it of like, okay, well, this is something that like small businesses I see do all the time. They're really frustrated with Facebook ads or Google ads or something like that. And this isn't like true perfect incrementality, but it's something you can always try. Is they're struggling with them. They don't think they're driving impact. They say, all right, just turn them off for 2 weeks. It's not perfect. There's a lot of flaws to that design, but it's the similar concept of like, okay, do I actually see a drop when I do something like that or not? And a lot of times with
Yeah.
things like display advertising, turn it off and we might not see as much of a, and you need to watch it on the long tail as well. Cause like,
Yeah.
once again, not perfect, but that's essentially the definition is like trying to get closer to that. And I think there's one little piece I want to add on top of that is that, um, a lot of data scientists and data experts that have big budgets to play with, bigger than mine, like Avinash Kaushik, he's a great resource, has said that they believe that the highest incrementality that you can reach is 20% for the
Oh,
best
wow.
possible campaign. So it's going to create like essentially like a 20% uplift in whatever you're doing. That's what marketing drives. And I think that's a really like kind of a kick in the teeth a little bit because we've been running in this way for a long time where it's like,
Right.
oh my God, my business isn't doing as well. I need to do better at marketing. And yes, but there's so many other aspects to that. Like, and I think marketing teams probably also go, oh, like a sigh of relief almost that like the
Yeah.
expectation has been that they are the ones driving everything. And anytime
Yeah.
anything goes wrong with the business, you look at marketing instead of looking at, yeah, I talk a lot about product or customer
Yeah.
service or
Mhm.
whatever other things there could be.
I think that's really interesting because you're absolutely right. I think so many people think that marketing is the end all be all. And what we've seen is that a lot of times fulfillment's broken or customer service is broken. Our products just really aren't great, right? Or there's a flaw in design and or whatever is the issue. And I think that's definitely an interesting take on it that 20% is really only as much as you're going to see, right? And so that just it also I think gives hope, right, to a lot of business owners too that maybe don't have a huge budget to be able to spend in marketing, that it's really not about pushing more money, because there is only a specific runway that you can get from that. But if business isn't driving as much as you want, go look at some of those other parts of your business. Return rates, I think, are a huge part of the profitability model of business, product-based business owners, and customer service and all those other things that you just mentioned. I think that's a huge piece of really dialing in your overall business tool. So great advice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that people might use to be able to measure these things. And I am guilty of this myself. Like, I will create a spreadsheet for everything, right? I will buy whatever data tool comes in front of me because I think it's the right thing. And, you can just get overwhelmed because there's so many companies out there now that are, saying they can, solve all these problems with just a click of a button. But the reality is that it, of course, is going to be different for every business, right? And what you need. But what are some really good tools that you can use as a business owner to just start to see some of these trends that you're talking about?
Yeah, no, it's good. And I mean, I'll definitely say that, like, if someone ever says, "Oh, it's plug and play" or whatever, like they're trying to sell you something. And,
Right.
there are some tools that are pretty nice. And if it fits your, needs specifically, they can make a big difference. But, um, I think the starting by the baseline, you were joking a bit about the spreadsheets, but, if you aren't making good forecasts and projections in Excel of your, if you don't have a really nice detailed P&L, and if you don't have forecasts that you're running for your business, and that doesn't matter how big you are. I mean, when our company went, like, the second year was only 3 people, and I still ran forecasts for how I expected, like, theoretically, the business to run. That's
Yeah.
like a core piece that you still always need to rely on something like that. So, sometimes it's not as sexy as some of the other options. And obviously there are forecasting tools and softwares out there that you could use. But if you're a smaller business, like, yeah, don't discount the value of, like, using Google Sheets or Excel. But
Yeah.
beyond that, when you're starting to put in place the other pieces you want to measure, having a website analytics tool is
Hmm.
kind of one of the things that you can check the boxes with.
Okay.
We talk always about Google Analytics because it's one of the free ones. There's definitely some other options coming up out there, especially, like, with everything that's changing. Um, but yeah, a web analytics tool. Google Analytics is usually the most universally known. It's pretty easy to implement, so that's usually the place people go to first, is just to
Hmm.
implement something like that. And what that gives you is just the baseline of, like, what are people doing when they come to your website? What pages do they look at? There's some debate about how effective it is now, but, like, able to see generally what sort of sources they're coming from. It's just
Yeah.
like that general baseline that you kind of need. Um, and really, that you can go a long way with just Google Analytics
Yeah.
and, using spreadsheets to measure financial metrics. But beyond that, obviously, when you start to get into the world of advertising online, you'll have data coming in from some of these other platforms. So the baseline maturity would be, like, you keep the data in the platform it came from or pull it into a spreadsheet. So you'd have, like, you'd look at the data in Google Ads, you'd look at the data in Facebook ads, etc. And then sometimes pull it together in either a spreadsheet or a free dashboarding tool. The one that's in the stack with Google is called Looker Studio now.
Yeah.
Um, and those are, like, the most basic. I can give some recommendations for, like, the next level of maturity,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you'd like. I mean, I
Sure.
think um, one that I always recommend for smaller businesses that are doing a decent amount of advertising on Google Ads is called Optimizer. I'll send you, it's spelled weird. It's spelled with a Y instead of an I. So,
Oh,
like a YZR. And what that tool does is, like, can aggregate your multiple accounts of Google Ads, and it helps you do bidding smarter because it, like, automates it and does it in bulk. So it'll, like, provide all the recommendations, and you're able to kind of click, and it pushes it back to Google Ads. There's other tools like it, but the reason I think it's really strong is because it has a lot of good quality score tracking, which quality
mm-hmm.
score is really that if you're, like, say, trying to improve ROAS, instead of some of the other ways you could do it, what's most important is to make sure you have the highest quality score on your ads, which is essentially, like, this measure of like the relevancy of the ad text to the keyword and to the website you end up on and all of those
Yeah.
pieces together. Like if you improve that even by a few points of the scale, it's like a 10 point scale. Um, all of a sudden you're going to have cheaper clicks for those ads.
Yeah.
So I mean, like those are like some recommendations. Like you can start to add in some other tools. There's also like one on the Facebook side called, I think it's called Ad Espresso or Adspresso.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's some things that like can help you manage those tools as a smaller business that are cheaper than having like an agency manage it for you.
Sure.
Obviously then the next level would be like maybe having an agency and a tool or whatever it is in
Yeah.
combination. But those are really like the basics. The other thing that I think is really important, and if you're not spending a lot on paid advertising, you should be spending it on, if you already, I'm assuming you're improved your product and customer service, like that
Yeah.
comes
Right.
first, but
Right.
like, uh, organic is like critical and also cheaper than paid
Mhm.
advertising. So having, and there's tools that you can use for free, like Moz and things like that, but like,
Yeah.
and SEMrush, etc. I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I have preferences, and if people are curious, they can always message me. But um, I think that that's like kind of the basics. And then the other part that you were kind of saying of like, well, at the very beginning of what else are people not looking at that maybe they should is like, are you regularly doing some amount of market intelligence research for yourself? So that's
Mm,
not based in a tool, right? But like, especially if you're in a product or, I mean, almost any business, you need to understand how the landscape is changing for you. And
right.
so that's more like external research. Like you might just buy a report or you might have someone, there's a lot of great freelancers out there that can like do some research for you. But I think that that's something that's
Yeah.
also like a data source that is really critical that sometimes we forget about a little bit.
Yeah, you said so many good things here. I think, just to kind of summarize, like the very basic minimum things that you should be looking at are, I heard you say Google Ads or Google Analytics, like, and a basic forecasting spreadsheet and a P&L, right? Like,
Yeah.
so if you have those things in place and that's not something that you're usually looking at, get that in place. But if you have those things in place and you're spending enough, your business is big enough where it actually makes sense, then kind of upgrade to some of these a little bit more advanced tools that keep you from having to like, do all the clicking and that kind of stuff, and or can give you a broader look at what's actually happening in your space. I like the market research or market intelligence piece of that because I really think that is a huge miss for a lot of people. And I don't think that they do spend any time looking at that. So you said something about freelancers doing that. And I don't want to go too far down a different hole, but like, how would somebody go about doing that if they were interested in finding out more about market intelligence? Like what questions should they ask, or where do you go to get that kind of information?
Yeah. It's a good question. And one thing that you can do is start off by like Googling a template of like a standard market research report. Um, Now we have Chat GPT and things like that that could actually write that brief and tell you what you should be looking for.
Yeah.
But you want to be looking at things that could impact your business. And I see this a lot for small business owners, especially ones that are also having like a brick and mortar sort of location.
Yeah.
Obviously, people are passionate about what they start their business in. People don't normally just go, well, my area is doesn't have a dog groomer, so that's the business I'm going to start because I know I'm going to
Right.
have a good amount of clients. Um, and I don't want to say that you have to do it that way because someone's just passionate about something and that's what they're going to start. But having some forethought, or while you're already in the business, some additional looks around and understanding of what's happening.
Yeah.
So are there competitors? Like, what are they doing? What is the demand? Like, what can I expect? Another one is, what can I expect for the final like vision of this business? Like, how much can it really grow? Because that's
Yeah.
something where sometimes people start a business and they have expect that it's going to just exponentially grow, but there's actually a limited market for whatever they're selling. So
Yeah.
like knowing what that market is and knowing how you're going to reach them and where that means you need to place yourself and how you would brand, like all of that comes from that market research. And so, it's that and like I said, that there's like lists out there that can do all of it. And if you just write up that brief, you should be able to, there's a lot of firms and freelancers, so you can go, on like one of these websites like Upwork, Fiverr, Catalent, etc.,
Yeah.
to find somebody who you feel like is, that has examples of similar like projects and so on that can do it for
Hmm.
you. Um, or, you can do some of that research yourself.
Yeah.
Obviously, like the more complicated stuff you might want someone's help with. But if you're a little data savvy and you just want to look around and understand, like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm a restaurant in this town, how many other restaurants are there and where exactly are they located? And where should I put my restaurant or where should I put my new location? Like
Yeah.
all of that, like using it just to leave even a little bit more information or data to inform that can make a huge difference for you
Yeah.
of like success or, not as strong of a success out the gate.
I think that's so great. And I think that is a huge miss. A lot of people don't do before they start their business. And I'm all about, solving a problem in the marketplace that you needed and you solved the problem with your product or whatever service that is, that kind of thing too. But I think you brought up a great point about there's only so much runway in certain areas or certain products and certain things that you can kind of plan like it's only going to go this far. And as long as I know that and I understand that and that I'm okay with, great. But if I don't kind of get that trajectory, then I'm going to set myself up for failure or feel like I'm a failure when the reality is the market's only so big. And there's only so
Hmm.
much that you can do. If you were a small business who has already started in doing that, I still think that kind of market research is helpful, particularly before product launching. I think is a huge way to use that if you're in business now and you maybe didn't do these things beforehand, but you're thinking about launching a new product, new fragrance, new thing, new whatever. Do the market research first before you do it. Even though your clients or customers tell you that they want it, doesn't necessarily mean you should do it.
Right.
Would you agree
Yeah.
with that? Right?
Oh yeah,
I hear
definitely.
that a lot. Like, well, my customers wanted it. I'm like, doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's a
How
good
many
thing to do.
customers too? Like,
Right,
yeah, I
right.
mean, I think, yes,
Yeah,
definitely like that sounding board and validation and trying to take off the rose colored glasses for just a
yeah,
moment. I've done it before where I've considered other businesses and done the work and gone, okay, well, if I choose to do this, I'm not gonna be able to do it full time, or I don't think that it's really like there's a
yeah,
big enough growth, and like looking at that realistically and going, all right, well, what am I gonna do about that? At least sets you up to have that right strategic conversation with yourself or your team members.
yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so Mary Beth, as we start to wrap up, what would be your one bit of advice that you would give business owners as it relates to data analytics? Like, what would be your one tip or piece of advice that you would give them?
That's a hard one. I think it would probably be to look at the whole picture and instead of just the parts. So look at what's most important for your business, and then follow the trail for where you would need to get information like or data to make that data informed decision
Yeah,
instead of focusing in on one area. Like look at the business as a whole, identify where you see the biggest money leak problem, and from there, you can say, all right, well, I have an issue with returns. How do I get more information about that? And play that data detective role. And that's going to be a lot more productive than building reporting for the sake of reporting or
yeah.
setting up tracking for the sake of tracking or going, well, everyone else talks about return on ad spend. So maybe I should focus on that. So.
Right, right. That's great. So if people want to find out more about you and your business, where should they go and where can we find out more info about all the things data analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. My firm is called Insight Lime Analytics. The website is insightlimeanalytics.com. We have a lot of good resources on there for businesses. We have some like budgeting, like marketing budget worksheets, how to calculate market budgets, all of that sort of stuff available.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of resources that we have. The other good place to get a hold of me is LinkedIn. I also post a lot of
Hmm.
content there. And so it's just MaryBeth Maskovas, and we'll show you how to spell it and stuff in the
In
show
the show
notes.
notes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and message me anytime. That's a great way to get a hold of me. I'm always happy to like answer questions and point people in the right direction.
Yeah.
But those are the main ways to get a hold of me.
Yeah, definitely check out her website because there are some really cool free guides and some case studies, resources, things like that for people who maybe are a little bit more nervous about data analytics or who this isn't really like, you know, fun for them. These are some really cool resources that are easy to use and checklists and things like that. So check her out there. We will drop everything in the show notes. Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for joining us. This was a really fascinating conversation, an important conversation that I think so many of our listeners need to hear from different perspectives and just understanding how important data is, but to use it in the right way. So thank you for sharing your insights with us. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast, and I'm looking forward to seeing what questions come up from it.
That'd be great. Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you have questions for Mary Beth, we have the chat bot down below that you can drop your questions and we'll get those over to Mary Beth and maybe we'll bring her back for a second question and answer sort of situation. So definitely drop those questions. Thank you so much for listening. We have more exciting guests coming this year, more conversations about data, marketing, analytics, all things branding, and some really cool product spotlights that we've got coming up. So thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.